I do many different things, but they're all related to human sexuality. So I teach the psychology of human sexuality at the University of Florida to about 150 to 200 students a year, which I love, although I often tell them I'm not teaching them, I'm unteaching them what they'd learned previously. I also am a licensed psychologist and a certified sex therapist, and I see clients related to general and sexual issues. I also do a lot of talks and trainings nationally and internationally, not just for lay people, but for psychologists who have no training in working with people with sexual issue, to gynecologists who sadly don't get enough training in sexual issues. And I also write, I'm the author of 2 books, both aimed at empowering women sexually. Passionate Sex, which is written for women who've lost their desire and becoming clitorate, why orgasm equality matters and how to get it, which is aimed at exposing the cultural orgasm gap and empowering women to orgasm.
You know, you said something really interesting. You don't teach your students anything, you unteach them. Talk to me more about that.
So sadly, because we have terrible sex ed in our country, terrible. As you probably know, it's not even required except in 13 states to be medically accurate. And because people often get their ideas about sex from media, which is not real, it's designed to entertain. And many people get information from parents, other people. So by the time they get to my class, these college students have knowledge about sexuality, but so much of it is false. So much of what they come into my class believing, I then present them with science that no, actually that's not true. I can give so many examples. So I often tell them, and by the end of the class, they agree that the scientific, sex positive, scientifically accurate sex ed, which I aim to provide in the class, is about unlearning falsehoods that they've been carrying with them and learning the scientific sex positive truth.
What are some of the falsehoods that you feel like in general many people are indoctrinated with?
Okay, so let's start with the idea that a big penis is essential to a woman's pleasure. And the bigger the penis and the longer it lasts is what women want. And research shows, right, that only about 18% of women orgasm from just thrusting alone, and only 4% say it's their most reliable route to orgasm. So this is a myth that's harming both women and men, because men are feeling all this pressure to be big, which they can't, they're born how they're born, right? To last long. And I have so many women say, I thought my vagina was broken because I don't react the way that people react in the movies. Very little fooling around. He puts his penis in my vagina and I'm having an instant orgasm. Another myth that hurts women especially is that intercourse, sex is supposed to hurt, especially the first time, and that's not true, right? A lot of the pain in first time intercourse, for example, is due to not being aroused enough, not because the hymen is tearing. The hymen doesn't even have very many blood vessels. That blood is often but due to not being aroused and the not having lubrication or knowing to use lubrication. Another myth is for women, if I'm turned on, I'll be lubricated. If I'm not turned on, I won't. No, we have something called arousal non-concordance. Our brain and our genitals don't always go in tandem. We can feel aroused in our head and not lubricate, or we can be lubricated to something that doesn't arouse us. Oh, I could just go on, but we probably have other questions, but this is something I feel very passionately about, all these falsehoods.
At Live Jasmin, we've seen that many members come to the site to basically explore their sexuality. An example of that would be maybe they have a fantasy that they've been too afraid to act out with a partner, and they don't even know if they like it. So they kind of just want to try it and explore and see, oh, I really do like that, or I'm never doing that again. This inclination to explore their sexuality is something that I think many people, for some reason, are not encouraged to do and are missing.
Yeah.
How many people really know themselves sexually?
Hmm.
And based on how many people are just doing what they're told you do, kind of how you gave the example of the education, teaching us exactly, these myths. What consequences do people face if they don't know themselves sexually, if they haven't really explored themselves?
That is a great question. And I think, the fact that people feel ashamed of their fantasies is another, thing that because we're told like so many times, like what you think is what you want and not necessarily sexually, and Justin Lee Miller, who I know you all have interviewed, has a great book called Tell Me What You Want. He did a study of people's fantasies and they're pretty common, yet people are still ashamed of them. So, what's the impact? So, I think it's not just the impact of not exploring it yourself. I think we have to take a step back. I think people don't explore themselves due to shame. So, what's the impact of sexual shame? It's feeling broken, it's not exploring oneself. And then, what's to answer your question more directly? What's the impact of not exploring yourself? You don't know yourself, you don't know what you enjoy. You're in a narrow box that you were told to be in, which you may or may not find enjoyable. It's sort of like I'm a therapist, right? So let me use a metaphor. It's what's the impact of not exploring your thoughts and feelings about the way you were raised? What's the impact of not exploring your thoughts and feelings about how you feel about perhaps being a mother when you're a young adult, if you're a childbearing person? The impact is you follow a route, a road that you're not even sure you want, and you might end up dissatisfied. There's a great old quote, I don't remember who said it, an unexamined life is not worth living. And they're talking about psyche, but I think we can extend that to sexuality, that your life is much richer if you allow yourself to figure out who you are and what you want in life and in bed or wherever else you have sexual relations.
In your experience of seeing patients and having students, have you found that there's one block in particular to healthy sexuality or intimacy that you just kind of see repeating itself over and over again?
That's such a good question. Well, I think, can I name two?
Yeah, please.
Okay, I think for the general population, it's silence and shame.
Mm.
It's being told this is something dirty. We don't talk about it. We don't do it. We don't touch ourselves. We don't. It's the silence and the shame. So many people are raised either with explicit shameful messages or if not with just the silence, like you're watching TV with your parents, someone kisses and there's this like everybody's uptight, so a silence and a shaming. And then unfortunately the other thing that I see as a therapist and as a teacher, especially but not exclusively among women, is the impact of sexual trauma and sexual coercion. We have such a high incidence of sexual trauma and sexual coercion. That is a harm that I see quite a bit.
How do you recommend that people start to deal with this first component of shame in regards to their sexuality?
Yes, that's a great question. So, I mean, I think it depends how deep the shame is. Where does it come from, right? Someone with sort of generalized shame is going to need something different than, say, someone raised in purity culture. Like it depends how negative the messaging around sex and sexuality are. But I think the first step is truly, I mean, education. You know, it's really like Justin's work, right? Like so many people, for example, feel so ashamed. I've talked to clients who feel ashamed of forced sex fantasies, right? And then I can use this research and say, actually, a great many, a majority of people have these. So, you're not weird. You're you're human. You're experiencing what humans are experiencing, but we don't talk about. So it's beginning to speak what you have previously been told was unspeakable.
Is all intimacy more about connection than anything else, or sexuality? Or is it genuinely about both a carnal and potentially connection based
I
relationship?
think we can't say. I think different people, right? And this cuts across gender lines. Like I talk to the students in my class, and there are many who say, sex is women and men. Sex is just about scratching an itch, getting, you know, getting my genitals taken care of, engaging that way. I don't need a connection. Have others who say, I can't engage sexually without a connection. And the connection is the most important thing to me. And there's others that are somewhere in between, or some encounters are one and some encounters are another. That said, I also believe as a therapist, we all crave connection. We all crave being seen, being felt that we care and others care. So, like, I think both are genuine human needs, right? Sex, to be satisfied is a genuine human need. To feel connected is a genuine human need. And for many, the two are tied. For some, they're not. But if I hear this story of a man who's coming for 15 years and nothing sexual happens, right? Not even the shirt coming off. That says to me what that person is craving is being seen, is human connection. And that's a different story than someone who comes once, which I'm guessing you have that too, right? To, I don't know, maybe not. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. To engage, and it is purely sexual. So people come for all reasons, but one of those is human connection.
Yeah.
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 Um, in this age, the digital age, what role do you see social media, platforms like Jasmin, OnlyFans, any type of social platform playing when it comes to human connection? Is this digital connection enough? Is it something else in its own right that we need? What are your thoughts?
Wow, that is a big and powerful question. Um, I think, and I don't mean to keep saying there isn't one answer, but I'm going to keep saying it, right? I think that for some people, social media, digital connection is a way to fill a void when what the person really wants is in-person connection, and it leads to more isolation and loneliness. I think for other people, it is indeed the only and the best way to fulfill a connection. You spoke of somebody who's homebound, right? The social media live, Jasmin, what you offer is something that maybe 50 years ago that person couldn't access. And that's deeply powerful and healing. That's very different, for example, than maybe and I've worked with people like this, right? A young, able-bodied person who can leave their house, but isn't because of deep social anxiety. And then, is this something they do which is helpful, but does it prevent them from challenging them to get out? I don't think there is a one size fits all answer for this.
Mm, yeah.
I think it's, and maybe that's the therapist brain in me, right? Everything is person dependent and context and history and current circumstance dependent.
No, I actually completely agree with you, and how it's being used, and absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So for some, it's a lifesaver. For others, it's a crutch that might be less harmful than therapy that helps you get out into the world and create in-person connections. It just depends. So I'm glad you agree. The piece of research that influenced me the most wasn't just the research, was what happened to the researcher. Okay. So Cher Haidt, who wrote the Haidt Report, I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it was in the 70s, I think it came out, maybe the 60s, late 60s, early 70s. I have it on my shelf. I could pull it up. So Cher Haidt was the first researcher who said it loudly enough, really, to get the public's attention that women weren't enjoying sex, that women were faking orgasm, and that women were not orgasming from intercourse alone, that many women were leaving encounters dissatisfied, masturbating after because they thought they should orgasm from intercourse alone. So this is old news, right? This is the 60s, 70s. What was most fascinating and upsetting is that her message was so hated. Playboy called it the hate report instead of the Haidt report. She got death threats. She actually had to leave the country and go into hiding. Yeah. I mean, she passed away a couple years ago. This is all well documented. But so it's not just the research, it's that the reaction to the research, it upset the status quo so much that people could not handle it. And in fact, if you think about Kinsey, we're talking old research now, his book on males was well received. His book on females was scandalous. He got a lot of negativity for that. So I think for me, what I've consistently seen, and this still happens to this day, to be honest with you, is that research about women's sexuality is often disregarded, demonized, or there isn't enough of it. So to me, it's not just one piece of research, it's the whole zeitgeist, I said it wrong, of research on female sexuality and female sexual pleasure.
Mm, that is really interesting. Why do you think that is?
The patriarchy. Sorry to say, but, and I'm not blaming men. I mean, honestly, every time I say this, I feel like, God, it's like so defensive. I have to say this. Like, I love men. I've been married to the same man for almost 38 years. I don't have anything against men. So when I say the patriarchy, I don't mean men. I mean the culture in which we often demonize, disregard women's sexuality and overvalue men's sexuality. So even our language reflects this. For example, we use the word sex and intercourse as if they're one and the same. We use the word foreplay just to lead up to the main event. So in other words, we're equating sex with the way men most reliably orgasm, not the way women most reliably orgasm. If we overvalued female sexuality, we would call um, we would call um, we would call intercourse post play and clitoral stimulation for sex. So the bottom also, we label all women's genitals a vagina. That's not true. That's one little part. It's a canal where babies go in and penises go out. The vulva is where most of the nerve endings are that result in orgasm, yet we label our entire genitals, the part that's more useful to men than women ourselves. So this is steeped in the very fabric of our culture. It is not this man's fault or this man's fault. It's steeped in our culture.
What do you think is so threatening to that energy about women coming into their pleasure?
I wish I knew, because then we could fix it, right? I can document it throughout the history. I can document it today. And there's a lot of people who would give different answers, but many people would say that it's about power, that women's sexuality and women are so powerful. You know, our sexuality is intense. We can have multiple orgasms. We cycle with the moon. Like that, if our power as sexual beings was exalted, it might be kind of scary. It might threaten the whole way things are.
Mhm. Yeah, interesting. It's fascinating. And we've certainly, I do find it interesting that, the women that have been very clearly in touch with their sexual pleasure and it's known to the world, those women are always and have been really demonized throughout history. And really, there have been efforts to cut them off from the group, cast
Yes.
them out.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, luckily it's not as extreme today, but I think the roots are there. And
Mhm.
I'm talking US culture, it's still, and there's many other cultures where it's very dangerous for a woman to have sexual needs and pleasure. So, yeah, knowing one's own needs and being able to express them. It's a twofold process. What do I like? What do I want? What do I want to try? And how do I let someone else know that? How do I express that outside of my head? So, knowledge of oneself coupled with sexual and general communication without shame or being shamed.
I think a lot of women in particular, but many people are very uncomfortable expressing their needs directly. There's definitely almost like this unspoken pressure to not do that, to put other people first and their needs first. So, when you're seeing patients, how do you encourage them to verbalize and express their needs if it's something that they're truly afraid to do for whatever
Right.
reason?
Right. Well, we spend time on it. They have to, if it's an individual client, they have to get to the point of trusting me to
Mhm.
speak the unspeakable, to share this need, this idea, these feelings that they thought were shameful. And then it's being received with acceptance and admiration instead of shame, like, and normalizing often, you know. So much of what my clients and students will tell me that they're so ashamed of, I've heard 100 times, you know. So I can truly, with an open heart, say, yeah, no big deal. Thanks for telling me. Instead of, oh my God, that's weird. That would be like the most harmful thing a therapist or anyone can do, right? So, and then after that, it's once somebody accepts their needs, then it's a skill. It is a skill. It's not magic. It's something we're never taught. And I teach communication skills. And sometimes we'll bring in the partner. Sometimes we'll role play. Sometimes we'll write a letter to the partner. Sometimes they'll just own their needs and go talk to their partner. So it's a skill. People are not taught communication skills, general and definitely not sexual.
That is for sure. And I think that that is one of the reasons why true interpersonal soft skills are one of the highest commodities in this day and age. You can make really good money for having really good communication and soft skills. I
Yeah.
mean, if you just even look at using the example of models on Live Jasmin, some of these girls have become millionaires and they essentially are getting paid to talk to people through a screen. They have become millionaires for having these soft skills because these skills are not common right now. So people are willing to pay good money to experience them.
Yes, it is rare. It is very rare. Yeah. And and it, there's two pieces of it. For it is teachable, but some people are easier to teach than others, right? Like
Mhm.
it's almost like it's like learning to be an artist, right? Like like I know this because I train those skills in therapists. I also teach new therapists how to be therapists in my job. And some people, it's like they got the natural and I just have to mold the clay. Others, it's like, ooh, okay, that, so I do think it's both teachable and some people are very talented at it and it's easier to teach. So yes, so people are making millions because they have honed this skill that and it's sad, right? That most people don't know how to do that for others. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything about this industry, this space, this field, when it comes to sexual health and wellness that we haven't talked about, but you do wish that people would understand or know?
That's another great question. I think it's communication, which encompasses consent. It can come like before sex. It encompasses being able to talk at the kitchen table about sex like you would anything else. During sex, talking during sex, right, left, harder, softer, whatever. And talking after sex, how was that? How could that be better? And it doesn't matter the context, right? To me, that goes in a long-term committed relationship, it goes in a hookup, and it goes with the models on Live Jasmine. Being able to communicate one's wishes before, during, and process after, though that's to me. I had a client once say, and I said, may I steal that line? She said, communication is the bedrock to make your bed rock. After we worked on communication skills. And I said, oh my gosh, that's just too brilliant, can I use it? So I think that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that that's part of why you can see these really in-depth long-term relationships that develop online, because there's so much communication that's happening that even though people may not be meeting in person, or maybe sometimes, depending on the context or platform they are, but just be having to talk a lot and communicate a lot and go into depth about things, it makes people feel really connected, which, as you and your client have said, can definitely be a great bedrock. I think we can all
Yeah.
agree on that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know, I mean, you're interviewing me, but I'm just thinking of this in a sense, the the platform of Live Jasmine requires more communication because you can't do it through touch, right? You're not in the same space. So it might even require more communication. That might be an assumption on my part. I'm actually asking you if that's okay.
Yeah, in general it does, because if you just even look at the context, the member wants to go there to have some needs met. And the model is not going to be able to meet those needs unless they're communicated. But the member is also the member has the understanding that it's going to be her goal to try and meet those needs. So the member's now feeling a little bit more relaxed and safe about fully and authentically sharing them. He or she knows it's a safe place, that these needs are most likely going to be met, and then they start communicating authentically. And then the model has an opportunity to be like, well, I have done that and I like it too. And it just develops this very intimate connection, because this person, though you've never met them, is seeing a part of you that very few, if anyone else, does. You're feeling safe enough to open up this other
Right.
part of you, which is incredibly bonding, and
Yeah, it's vulnerable. You're entering a space where you want something, right? And you've previously felt too ashamed, scared to say, but now you're entering this space, if I'm hearing, which is like, you're going to be accepted, and you can be your true vulnerable sexual self.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. Thank you for answering my question. I know that's a little reversal, but I really appreciate it because it occurred to me as we were chatting.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
You are welcome. Thank you for having me on this very wonderful podcast. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we really appreciate your time.